All right.
Go for it.
Thank you, Luther. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another version of ApprenticeSIP. We're really excited to have today's guest joining us all the way from Indiana. It's dinner time out there, so thank you, Claire. So I met Claire back in 2019 when I was attending summits in Zurich, and anybody who attends summits gets, for lack of a better term, kind of indoctrinated by the Swiss Youth Apprenticeship Program. And you come home and you can't think about anything but just what a marvelous system they've created and how jealous we are of them. And there's this idea that you can't recreate what they've done. You'll hear that time and time again at the starting of the ACA Summit a couple of weeks ago. Katie talked about that. But Claire left in 2019 and said, forget that. We're going to recreate what they've done in Switzerland. And so, as the president and CEO of the Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation, Claire, for every year since 2019, has brought almost 300 leaders from education, workforce, government, business sector, most importantly, over to Switzerland to learn about the way that their apprenticeship program, their models, their systems, the economics behind it, et cetera. And as a result, they are now starting to replicate that system in Indiana. So today we're going to hear about iLab Indiana, INCAP, and all of the fantastic work that Claire is leading. So without further ado, take it away, Claire.
Before you start, let me just do some quick, let's do some intros. So we've known Claire, but let's do very quick intros because we've got a big crowd tonight. So just your name and your and title. So Orion, go for it.
Orion Willis, Tech SF, co-founder of ApprenticeSIP.
Okay, Anita.
Anita Gay, Associate Director of Workforce and Operations at Bayvec Media.
And Cheryl and the wonderful Milpitas crew. You give us the rundown. Just say hello. That would be great.
Hello, Cheryl Jordan and team from Milpitas Unified School District in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Thank you. Steve Hamilton.
Steve Hamilton, a retired Cornell professor living in San Diego and part of the Northern California Summits team, and I won't try to explain how that happened.
Okay, well, welcome. Caleb?
Caleb Van Docto, Senior Associate at Social Policy Research. Hi, y'all.
Rick?
Rick Rafey, Consultant on AI Native Talent Pathways in Santa Clara, California.
Thank you, Rick. Annalise?
Hi, Annalise Goger, a fellow at the Brookings Institution and co-founder of ApprenticeSIP.
Good to see you, Annalise.
Good to see you.
Hey everyone, Alex Hussein, consultant working on apprenticeship policy and ecosystem design in some of our regions in the state.
Welcome. Michaelin?
Hi, Michaelin Romero. I am a consultant and work as a business skills coach for a company called American Apprenticeships Groups.
Good to see you. Paul?
Thanks.
Good thing. Don't try the last name. It's a tough one. Paul Giacomoto. I'm with DAS. I'm the branch chief with the Apprenticeship and Workforce Innovation Unit. Fancy way to say kind of the non-traditional side of apprenticeship.
See you. Jean-Marie?
Jean-Marie Duval. I'm with DAS. I am the outreach manager here.
Bill?
Adele Burns. I'm the chief here at the Division of Apprenticeship Standards.
What else? DAS team, who I don't see a name. Could you just introduce yourself? Hello.
Selena.
Hi, I'm Selena Olson. I am the Youth Partnership Manager with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards.
Welcome. Great to see you. Katrina? Not working. Okay, we'll get back to you. Nikki, good to see you again.
Hey, Luther. Hi, I'm Nikki Tasiello. I am lead the Northern California Apprenticeship Innovation Hub for Build Within. It's a technology platform that manages apprenticeship or any kind of ship that sails in the night, as our co-founder likes to say, programs, as well as a DOL program sponsor and intermediary. So I'm here to really learn how you all are doing it in Indiana.
Thank you.
Hi, Erwin Jankovic, formerly of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, where we started an apprenticeship program about 25 years ago.
Great, good to see you again. So Claire will present for about 20 minutes and then open up for questions. As you all know who have been here before, dialogue is an important part of this experience. Please use the raised hand function and I'll recognize you. And then around 5:25, Anita will wrap us up. So Claire, welcome, and you can please get started.
Thank you. And hi, everybody. It's so great to be joining you after my dinner time, Orion, because we eat early in Indiana. Can everyone see my screen, my slides?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, I am really excited to tell you about the work we are doing to build what we are calling the Indiana Career Apprenticeship Pathway. And the first thing I always like to start out talking about when I'm talking about this work is why we're doing this. So what is the need for a new education and training pathway in Indiana? And this data is not going to be surprising to any of you. We know that in about 5 years, more than 70% of jobs in our country are going to require something more than a high school diploma. And Indiana, probably like many other folks on this call, we're not on track to meet that demand. Right now, we have got about 52% of our high school cohort enrolling in college and less than 40% actually making it through. We also started administering the SAT in 2022 for 11th graders, and only about 25% are actually deemed college ready by their 11th grade year. That doesn't mean that they can't become ready, but they're not ready at the end of high school. So we really passionately believe that we need to be building a new professional education and training pathway to address those talent needs. And very importantly, we think this is going to be great for students who learn better through a combination of hands-on learning and classroom instruction. And if you look around the world, Switzerland really stands out. Their vocational and professional education and training system, or VPET system, is the world's gold standard, not only for preparing young people for careers, but also upskilling and reskilling adults. And the thing that I personally love about the Swiss system is that this pathway is a complement to the academic pathway that exists everywhere around the world. So our goal is that by implementing a new pathway like this in Indiana, we're going to ultimately get more Hoosiers to have something more than a high school diploma, well prepared for careers, meeting the needs of our employers and our economy. So those of you who've been to Switzerland have seen this slide. You know they actually have a system when everyone uses the same slide, but the headline is all you need to look at. And by the way, you'll get a copy of these slides. Is that it's complex? That's what I want you to take away from this. So we took a stab at trying to simplify it in talking with folks in Indiana. They still laugh at this and say it's complicated. So I will walk you through kind of the big points that I want you to take away. And the headline here is that the Swiss model really, what they have done is build many pathways and no dead ends. That's what's so appealing about the Swiss VPET system. And there's really 3 things that they have done that we have been studying and trying to implement in Indiana. The first is that this path on the left, the academic path, everyone has that. Starting in about the 1970s, they started building this employer-led professional path. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is that in about the 1990s, they realized that wasn't sufficient. And they started building these structured mechanisms to ensure folks could go up those pathways and cross over back and forth between the academic and professional pathways, which is what really ensures then the no dead ends. And if you talk to anybody in Switzerland, they all use the same word, permeability, which they're very proud about, and justly so. And then the last thing that we have studied and really admire is that they have a comprehensive career advising system in the 8th and 9th grade that is very tightly connected with employers and the labor market. So that helps young people make a good decision when their compulsory education ends at the end of 9th grade about which is the pathway I want to choose for what specific career path I think I might be interested in. And the great thing is if they change their mind or the economy changes, they can change their path. So I met Orion in 2019, but our work as a funder began actually in 2016 when the National Conference of State Legislatures issued a report that had a bunch of recommendations for the US. One of them was we need to do a better job with our CTE system, and that report pointed out Switzerland. So that's how we first kind of learned about it or started paying attention to it. And through that grant, we convened mostly lawmakers, but some business and education folks. And that led to a planning year in 2019, which is when a group of us attended CEMET's Institute. And coming out of that, there was finally enough, like, okay, we have to try to figure this out in Indiana, that we felt comfortable as a foundation awarding a grant to an Indiana organization to do two things. One was to launch a pilot program for youth apprenticeships specifically, so just one aspect of the Swiss system. And then also a statewide community of practice. And that was important because PIA had just launched and a bunch of different communities in Indiana had received youth apprenticeship grants. And so we wanted to make sure everyone was connected and hopefully not reinventing the wheel. So that was the purpose of that grant. And unfortunately, that work got underway in March 2020, like literally a week before the global pandemic. So we had a not so fast start, but we still had quite a bit of uptake. And when things kind of returned back to normal in 2023, CEMET started accepting teams again. And we had another team go. And this team was mostly our government leaders. So we had our Secretary of Education, Higher Education, the chair of both the Senate and House Education Committees. And we also did have business folks as well from the chambers, et cetera. And we actually went in thinking what we needed to do was to try to get more scale because we had kind of much slower ramping up than anyone had anticipated. And we kind of concluded going in, we thought what we need to do is come up with like a governance structure. And we actually said, that's wrong. What we need to do is figure out how to put employers in the lead. So by 2023, there were 5 different pilot sites that were operating in Indiana. We had about 100 employers, about 450 high school apprentices, and about 50 school system partners in those efforts. And despite our inability to kind of grow much faster beyond that, we still learned a ton. And through that statewide community of practice that I mentioned, we sought the input of all the stakeholders around the state who'd been doing the pilot programs and trying to figure this out. And here's what they told us. They said, our number one problem was we actually didn't have industry in the lead. That was problem number one. Number 2 was that we had very rigid high school schedules, which made it hard for high school students to leave the school building and actually go to the workplace. Related to that was transportation. If somebody's only going 3 hours on a Thursday, it's hard to find a public transit solution to that, school bus or whatever. Also, I think broadly recognizing in Indiana, maybe this is true for you too, mostly our career counseling happens around college in around 11th grade, and that we really need to be doing it much earlier and have it be broader. Also, those who were actually in the pilot phase and doing these programs, there wasn't actually a credential that somebody got that said, here are the competencies that I've developed through a youth apprenticeship. And then also, again, probably not surprising to any of you, what we heard, especially from employers, was how fragmented the work-based learning landscape was. And what that meant for employers is that they kept getting contacted by lots of different organizations, asking them all for essentially the same thing. And that was really hard for them to manage. So that's the background of where we started. So we decided that we wanted to take a different approach coming out of 2023 CEMETs. And our foundation awarded a grant to the folks in Switzerland at CEMET's ETH Zurich to do what they call iLab, which is short for Implementation Lab. And really the goal was, how do we actually go from these pilot programs to figuring out how to create a statewide system that can get to scale? And we intentionally brought together everybody from government, business, from a bunch of different sectors, K-12, higher education, and policy. So we launched that in December of 2023. And here was what we anchored it around. Having been to summits and then having learned through all the pilot programs, what we were lacking was the key thing that we kept hearing about and observing in Switzerland was that employers were actually in the lead with that professional pathway. And the reason that's important is because employers pay for a lot of that system. And the reason they do that is because it's actually helping meet their labor market needs and they get a positive ROI from that investment. So that was how we kind of designed iLab. And as a result, what we did, and Orion mentioned this when he introduced me, we decided to take employer-focused trips to Switzerland that were organized by industry. And what we did was go with employees who raised their hand, who said they were interested. So we kind of grouped them together by industry. And in 2024, we did banking and insurance, we did healthcare and life sciences, and we did advanced manufacturing. And then earlier this year, we did IT and microelectronics, we did construction, and then hospitality and culinary. And the way that we arranged these trips, they were primarily employers, and we either got the CEO, the head of HR, the head of operations, somebody like that who was in a position to do something when they got back home and also understood the talent challenges and needs at the organization. And we also always brought 2 K-12 and 2 higher education folks because it was helpful having them in the room and hearing their perspectives. And what we focused the trips around was going to visit what the Swiss call professional associations. That's the groups that organize employers by industry, to the actual employers, and then to the employer-funded and employer-led intercompany training centers. This is actually a slide that we got from one of our Swiss partners. And this was, to me, is one of the most helpful ways to think about what they call vocational education and training, VET program, which is their high school apprenticeship program. They still have the adult programs, but the one that is the most interesting for our employers, and I think also hardest to do, is the youth apprenticeship. And essentially for these occupations, which begin in 10th grade, and they are either 3 or 4 years long, depending on which occupation a student selects, there is really the bulk of it is this practical skill development that takes place at the employer site 3 to 4 days a week. And then this intercompany training, usually that ends after the 2nd year because that's more like basic training that's more efficient to do together rather than on each individual employer site. And then very importantly, the high school continues throughout either the 3 or 4 year program. So there's the related theoretical knowledge that is also part of the training. For us, when we think about high school, I think that's a broader category. I think it could mean CTE center, college here in the United States. And after our 2024 trip, so last year, we actually issued a strategic plan to say, okay, we have seen enough. We think we know what we need to do to try to move beyond pilot programs in Indiana that are struggling to scale to figuring out how do we design and launch a statewide system that can get to scale. And this is listed in order. The number one thing that our folks told us was that we really have to establish what we've decided to call industry talent associations or ITAs. And their job is to convene employers and help them identify their occupations, function like these professional associations in Switzerland. And then we want to do those arrows that I showed you on that earlier slide. We want to make sure we're not creating dead-end programs. We want to make sure if students choose a high school apprenticeship, they can go on and get their bachelor's or master's degree if that's what they want to do. We also think we should be like the Swiss and have a labor market aligned career advising system that starts in middle school. And then finally, we think unfortunately, this is kind of the order we think it has to go in, defining clear roles and responsibilities so we can try to minimize some of that fragmentation. Okay, so we paid for some market research, actually twice, because we weren't quite sure we had the right name, and came up with Indiana Career Apprenticeship Pathway. We tried words like professional, like co-op, and this was what stuck with all the different studies that were done. So this is our version of vocational and professional education and training. It's called Indiana Career Apprenticeship Pathway, or INCAP for short. Here's our logo. And here's the scope. Again, very much modeled off of what we've learned about in Switzerland, is we want this to be all industries when we're operating at scale. And also we want to make sure that it's formally linked with the education system to enable that permeability and economic mobility, which is part of what makes the Swiss system so interesting and successful. We have two types of education and training programs. Again, this is the Indiana version of what the Swiss call VET and PET. We are calling the high school apprenticeship program the INCAP apprenticeship program, or INCAP AP. And that is a paid multi-year apprenticeship that can start in either 10th or 11th grade. And then the PET adult programs, we're calling those INCAP career program, or INCAP CP. And again, those are industry-led, and that is for adults who either want to advance in their career or maybe even switch to a different career. And I thought this would be helpful to explain to this group, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. And again, you'll have a copy of this deck, because we have studied this at length through our grant to the folks in Switzerland, to all the visits that we've taken. And every time we go, we always meet with the association and the industries and ask them a bunch of questions, and to really try to understand what is this capacity that makes it possible for employers of all sizes in urban and rural and suburban communities to actually hire apprentices and make that successful for them as employers, but also for the students. And I'm going to read all these because they're really important. So the first thing that they do is that they represent, here we're saying here statewide, in Switzerland they're nationwide, but we're saying for Indiana, these ITAs represent employers in their industry statewide regarding their talent needs writ large, so both at the high school and the adult training level. And how they do that is they have to have employers become members, convene them at least once annually to assess what their talent needs are. And then using that information and in partnership with those employers, identify what are the priority occupations. And then this is the magic sauce right here. And this took me a while to really understand. Is what these associations actually do is develop what they call work cases. So those, for example, if you are a retail banking apprentice at UBS Bank in Zurich, Switzerland, or here at PNC Bank in Indianapolis, you need to know how to professionally communicate to a customer who comes up to your teller desk and wants to withdraw money or open an account. That's an example of a work case for a retail banker. And of course, that would completely be different if you were in manufacturing. You need to know how to use a lathing machine, et cetera. And then once they do that, they translate those into competencies that you actually need to have demonstrated and developed during the course of that INCAP AP, the high school apprenticeship program. And then they work with their employer members and then also their education partners to figure out where should those competencies actually be taught, which is best learned at the job site or in high school or college or a training center. And then they also develop a training manual for the employer-led portion of the occupation. And of course, their partners, whether those are K-12 or colleges, they're like they always do, they develop the curriculum for the classroom-based learning. And that, again, is kind of a partnership. And then the other thing the town associations do is provide training for company supervisors so that they actually know how to successfully supervise somebody learning these work cases over the course of their experience. So our foundation has provided startup grant funding to 6 industry talent associations. We just had a community of practice meeting today. They're doing a lot of work. And I also thought it'd be helpful to let you know, we didn't choose who those organizations were. We asked the Indiana employers after they had finished their trip to say, okay, you've just seen the Swiss system at scale. Do you want to do this in Indiana? So far, they've all said yes, which is great. And then we've asked them the question, okay, who's the right organization? Hopefully they already exist, that we should be giving some startup funding to, helping figure out how to take this function on. And so that's how we have selected the organization in each of these industries. So we've awarded grants, startup grants for advanced manufacturing and logistics, banking, construction, healthcare, information technology, and life sciences. And we have a couple more pending. Very importantly, we have only provided startup funding, and that was in large part because we didn't know exactly how many FTEs they were going to need, and that's different in Switzerland. We're confident it'll be different here based off of the demand in our state. But we also required that they get matching dollars from employers, and they could not get matching dollars from other philanthropy or from the public sector. The reason we think that's important is because to actually be at scale, where we're talking tens of thousands of students, you need to make sure that employers are investing in this. And the only way they're going to do that is that they're getting that long-term ROI that I talked about earlier on in this presentation. The other priorities that we're focusing on, because the ITAs alone are not sufficient to actually design and implement a system at scale. We're just wrapping up and haven't yet publicly announced, but will soon, regional implementer partners who are going to operate across the state of Indiana. Their job, they will be assigned in their region to the schools in that area so that they can be the point of contact for schools, for students. They will then be the point of contact for the statewide talent associations who will say, here's the occupations we have and here are the employers in your region who are interested in hiring a high school student. And as you well know, there's going to be a lot of work around, okay, what does that student schedule look like? What are their transportation needs? What if there's a problem that comes up? They will also do onboarding training for the students, et cetera. So those are going to be really important partners. I will say we decided not to call them intermediaries because that term means so many different things. And our marketing team came up with a different term. They're calling them INCAP connectors. And that is also important because they're already existing organizations that already do a lot of other things. So we really want to talk specifically about the task that they're doing to support the new INCAP programs for high school students. The other thing we're doing, Indiana's General Assembly passed a law earlier this year requiring that the Secretary of Education submit a plan to the General Assembly around how Indiana would implement a qualifications framework. So that is very important for getting that credential that actually is recognized not only by the labor market, but also the education system. And the Secretary of Education asked the iLab to present a recommendation to her office, which we did a few weeks ago. And their deadline is November 1st of this year to submit that to the General Assembly. So we are anxiously awaiting what the final version of that recommendation looks like. We've also been working with the iLab Governing Committee on trying to move away from a philanthropy-funded coalition of the willing. We now have more than 300 Hoosiers that are part of iLab, and figure out how to put in place a governance structure representing the private sector, public sector, and these regional implementers. So that is something we have developed and we'll start to transition to in 2026. And then next year, our biggest focus is going to be trying to ensure that we actually successfully launch the first high school apprenticeship programs. The ITAs are finalizing those, getting approval from the state. Those connectors are going to get up and running, working with the schools. It's a little bit later, honestly, than we'd like the timing to be, but that's because we're in startup phase. So hopefully going forward, that'll be a little sooner in the school year, because as the school folks on this call know, there's a lot of work in schedules, et cetera, that you have to work on with students that are selected by these employers for these programs. The thing that we actually came up with a recommendation a year ago on how could we reimagine our career advising system. Unfortunately, there was a lot of funding cuts at the state level. It was a budget year for us, in addition to all the federal cuts. And so that's a little bit on hold. And we think in startup, we're not going to need to come up with a brand new career advising system, but we'd like to start thinking about how would we move toward that as we hopefully get more students and employers and schools participating, especially in the high school programs. We are also continuously working on clarifying roles and responsibilities. I think that's an ongoing process, and maybe it always will be. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we are going to be beginning to transition to the new governance structure. So I'm going to wrap up with showing you our new version of that very complicated chart that I started off with. We are saying that the Indiana Career Apprenticeship Pathway will create new and great options every step of the way. And the key word here is that students are going to have flexibility so that they're not dead-ended and they can change their minds as their career interests change and as the labor market evolves. We will still have, like we always do, the academic pathway, but INCAP is our version of that professional pathway I showed you on that first slide. And a high school student will get to make a choice in the 9th grade about which of these pathways they want to choose. Indiana has just redone its high school diploma requirements, and we've worked very closely with the state on this. Our INCAP high school graduates will earn a high school diploma with what Indiana is calling an Employment Honors Plus seal, and they will also get an INCAP AP credential of value. So that is going to be the thing that we've been lacking with our pilots that says, here are the competencies that a young person has developed that will then allow them to go on to the next level, whether that's an INCAP professional program where they get a professional degree or an advanced degree, or if they want to go get their bachelor's or master's degree. And the reason that credential will be important is because ideally, we haven't finalized all the details yet, but a student could conceivably do one of the high school INCAP AP programs and then go get their 4-year degree in 2 years, which would obviously be wonderful for them from a pocketbook standpoint, but also just from getting to work right away with an employer. And then the ultimate goal is not only for the high school students, but the adults that participate in this pathway, that they will be able to be prepared at whatever level of education and training they choose for a great career that actually meets the needs of our employers and our economies and our economy. And when we released our strategic plan last year, I will say this makes me nervous to even show this to you, but we came up with an aggressive goal of 50,000 students, and that's both high school and adult students participating in INCAP in less than a decade. And although that's a very aggressive goal, the one thing we looked at was where we were unable to get more students to and through college, and the labor force projections of what are actually jobs, new jobs that will be created, over 100,000. So we thought, saying if we could meet half of that need, we would consider ourselves extremely successful. And ultimately, we'd like to connect those Hoosiers who are not finding success in college or their careers or the workforce with a new pathway that is actually going to prepare them for a great career, meet the needs of our employers, and ultimately help our economy grow. So that is my presentation. I think I kept it 20 minutes, and I would love to take your questions.
Thank you, Claire. That was absolutely brilliant. Questions, please. Don't be shy. Raise hands. Caleb.
I'm like trying to find the button and I'm just like, oh, whatever. Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much. That was super dense. And I feel like I'd like to actually have you give that again so I can again take notes. But saving that, the first question that I remembered jotting down that's somewhere in my notes is you were talking about employers going to CMETs back in, I guess, 2019, or at least you started in 2019, 2020, thereafter. And I'm curious if you had to incentivize employers to go there, because I assumed it sounded like part of the incentivization was they would have the opportunity to help identify those target industries, those 6 industries that the state was going to prioritize in developing the system. And so they were kind of getting a system level hand in training. But anyway, that's my assumption. So
very good question. So actually, this has not been led by the state. This has been led by philanthropy in the nonprofit sector. And we've had multiple conversations about that. And I will say so far, the employers have said, don't pass me laws. Let us figure this out, and then we will figure out what would be helpful from a policy standpoint. The state has been a fantastic partner in this work, as has K-12 and higher education. But to answer your question more specifically, the folks attending summits have been a combination of nonprofit, chamber, higher education, K-12 folks. What we decided to do when we realized we really need to figure out how to crack this employer nut was arrange specific trips that were not the Institute, because the Institute would be too much for most employers and maybe a little too academic and too long. So instead, we work really closely with our partners at ETH Zurich to figure out, okay, what are the aspects of the system that are just employer focused that we should be prioritizing? And they helped make introductions for us. And we, the Fairbanks Foundation, underwrote 100% of the cost for employers. So it was travel, it was food, it was transportation, it was all of that. I'm not going to tell you how much, but we allocated more than $25 million to those works so far. And I will say those trips have been completely worth it, because we bring the employers together. Some of them have never talked to each other. They spend time together, they're learning together, and then we spend time intentionally to say, okay, does this make sense for Indiana? and then they decide what are the next steps forward. So the fact that you're also 6 hours for us, different time zone from Indianapolis, means you don't get a phone call or emails for the first half of the day. So that's been super helpful with attention for the employers.
Thank you, Claire. I've got Rick and then our friends in Milpitas. Go ahead, Rick.
Great. Yeah. So thank you so much for this presentation. I saw Julie's or Katie Care's presentation at the apprenticeship summit in California a couple weeks ago, and she talked about the permeability and a lot of the same concepts. And it's great to hear that. And Orion told me come see this because actually seeing somebody do it in the U.S. is great. I'm in Silicon Valley, and I mentioned in my intro that I'm working on AI native talent pathways. So I'm specifically interested in what you're doing with IT, and specifically interested in not necessarily youth apprenticeship, but very interested in the industry talent associations. And I'm curious if there's a specific person, besides your slide deck and your great presentation, that I could align with to execute on this, because I'm already talking to major companies about the AI movement and what roles are starting to surface. And I'm getting great willingness to do something like this, but I don't know where to start exactly. So
yeah, great question. So one of the 6 new industry talent associations we have helped fund is IT. That one is one of the newer ones, but they're moving very fast. And they've had huge interest from employers. And because they're actually calling themselves Tech Indiana is the name they've chosen, because it's technology in every sector. And they have actually decided they're going to start with adult programs. Although I was just talking with the guy leading it today, and he said because there's so much interest, they're already talking about maybe we can do some high school ones too. So they might actually do both levels. But it was really interesting. I did attend a meeting with like one of the CIO network groups where we presented about this, and they're like, there are so many adults who could benefit from this. So there is huge interest. And really the way that I describe it to most employers, and they totally get it, is you're talking about competency-based education and training. So it actually doesn't matter how old you are. If you know what the competencies are, you could get it done in 6 months, 2 years, depends how long you take to learn those competencies. So if you would like, you can send me a note through Orion or Luther, and I'd be happy to connect you with the person who's leading that in Indiana.
thank you so much. That's great.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Cheryl and your team in Milpitas.
Thank you, Luther and Claire. I see on your INCAP that you have a whole program geared towards adult students. Would you speak more about that, please?
Yes. So that is the part of the pathway, the system that we've learned about in Switzerland that is something we thought we should also focus on. When we first started with the pilots, we were only focusing on high school apprenticeships. And the competency-based education and training programs, really, they start in high school in Switzerland, but they go all the way through retirement. And those are training programs that help an adult actually already in the workplace either upskill to be promoted in their current industry or reskill and switch careers. So those have had a lot of interest from the employers that have gone to visit. And I think relevance, especially in manufacturing, also because of AI, in IT for sure, but we've also heard that in healthcare as well. So that will be part of INCAP. It'll have 2 parts. It'll have the high school apprenticeship program and the adult programs as well. And really, again, we're asking the ITAs to take the temperature of the Indiana employers, because they actually have to hire the people, pay them a wage, and contribute to all this. So that's kind of how we're taking the lead of what the employers say they want to focus on first.
Thank you. Steve and then Deborah.
There's just a follow-up. Sorry, Luther.
Go ahead.
Antonia.
So Cheryl, have you had any published reports or documents that you've put out to the public that you would be open and willing to share?
You mean Claire?
Claire.
Yes, we have a new website which we just launched that has contact information for all the talent associations, an explanation of what we're doing. And we have the strategic plan we released last September, and then we are also getting ready to release an update on our continued progress. that will all be available on a website. So happy to, again, make sure Luther and Orion have access to that.
Thank you, Claire. Appreciate that.
Sure.
A great question. Steve, please, then Nikki.
Claire, this is even though I feel like I know a fair amount about what you've been doing, it's still mind-blowing. You listed very serious barriers to the high school program, and by the way, calling it AP apprenticeship program, advanced play, very nice. How have you been addressing those barriers, like the schedule and the transportation?
Yes, so I briefly mentioned, but it's a major change for Indiana, that Indiana has overhauled its high school graduation requirements. And we worked very closely with the Department of Ed on that to make sure that the high school INCAP programs were going to actually count toward that. And what that means is that students will actually be able to leave the building starting their junior year for up to 4 days a week, and have what they're doing on the job count toward their high school graduation requirements. So that's a game changer, because with the pilots that we've done so far, apart from students that were willing to work on weekends, they couldn't quite actually be gone for an entire day from the school, but now they'll be able to be gone for 3 to 4 days. And so that will allow them to spend a bunch of time doing those on-the-job work cases that I was telling you about, and that will count toward their high school graduation requirements. So that's one thing. The second is related to that. When a student was only gone for 3 hours on a Thursday, there is no public transportation solution for that. That's just not possible. But if they're gone for an entire day, that suddenly makes it possible, especially if you have a certain scale at a district, for example, where there could actually maybe be a bus that can drop off and pick up. Maybe you have a bus in your community that makes it easier, or even families can help out when it's the beginning of the day and the end of the day and not 2 hours on a Thursday. So I will say transportation is probably what gives us the most concern to figure out what that's actually going to look like. But we think it's going to be a lot easier if they're actually there for the whole day versus just a few hours, a couple days.
Good, thank you.
Thanks for that question. Nikki.
Thanks, Luther. Thanks, Claire. This is really great, and super impressed. Back in the day, when I was in my previous role, I worked with Ivy Tech as well as with Employ Indy. And so you all have a really engaged community out there. And so really just kudos to you. Um, I was curious, and you may have said this and I totally missed it, so apologies, but how is Ivy Tech engaged in this? I mean, I know you're focused on high school, but is there dual enrollment for college credit? I know you mentioned that they could go and complete their degree within, I think, 2 years versus 4 years, but just curious, like kind of how you're engaging your community college system as well.
Yes, excellent question. The funny thing is, the employers always ask me, when we're recruiting them to join this, what do the schools think? What do the colleges think? And I get to say to them, our schools are awesome. Like, they've already been doing work-based learning. They're all on board. They've been awesome. And there's also the ones, and you probably know them too, that are more willing to try something innovative. And they're the ones that have signed up to join us. So K-12 has been fantastic. Similarly with higher education. So the president of Ivy Tech, who just retired, she was the co-chair of our higher education committee, and before she left her job, introduced me to her replacement, and he's stepped in and taken on her role as the co-chair of the higher ed committee. And so Ivy Tech's been fabulous, but we intentionally did not just include Ivy Tech. We also included the four-year universities. So we have Purdue, we have IU, we also have all the independent colleges. Because we want this to be a pathway to go on and get additional education. We don't want this to be like, okay, college is bad, here's what you should do. No, we want this to be a great experience that could prepare somebody for the workforce, or also could prepare them to go on to college.
Are they getting college credit? Sorry, one follow-up quick question.
Oh.
Are they getting college credit while they are doing their apprenticeships?
So that is the final part of these occupations will be publicly released. So you'll be able to see the competencies, and each industry is doing something slightly different, but because of the ability to get dual credit, and we have what is called the Indiana College Corps that is recognized by all universities, which essentially is like your first year of your general classes. So yes, that is definitely going to be part of all of the high school apprenticeship occupations.
Thanks for the questions, Nikki. Alex.
Thanks so much, Claire. Learning so much as always, and great to see the progress. I'm curious around like functional diagrams, getting everybody on board and making this work statewide and even within the regions. Like, how did you walk through a functional diagram and get stakeholders across the state on board with that? And was that kind of like a top down? Was that top down and bottom up? Like, how did you navigate that? I have a part two, but I just imagine that was a sticky process.
Yeah, I will say I think we're still learning how to communicate because it is so dense, as somebody said earlier. What we did do with our grant to the folks at Switzerland was ask them to record special videos just for our stakeholders, and we have required everyone to watch them before we launched, and then before they go on a trip. Anyone we invite, we require them to watch the videos. And then we also have, kind of orientation sessions, et cetera. We are able to see if people watch the videos. So we know if somebody hasn't watched them, and we just strongly encourage them. We basically say, you're not going to get value out of this if you don't. But that's not enough. And I think in large part because the system is so totally different, but also people hear apprenticeship and they assume they know what that means. So I think that's an ongoing challenge that we have. However, what we have done, that's Ursula Reynolds at ETH Zurich always talks about functional diagrams. We call them racy charts. I mean, you might call them something different. We have spent a lot of time doing that, especially with the town associations and what we're calling the INCAP connectors, these regional intermediaries, especially because the former version that we started off with pilots, those intermediaries did every function. And now we've separated out the employer-focused functions to the town association so that we've worked closely with them to say, okay, if the town associations now exist and they're engaging with the employers, what does that mean for what you're doing? So we do have racy charts for all the different actors that are involved. Hopefully that answers your question.
It does. I don't imagine that was always the easiest conversation. And when you were choosing those in-camp connectors, which I think we would call regional apprenticeship intermediaries in California, how did you balance between like picking one winner or one group for a region, or just like, okay, throw it to the wolves and see who, and then like competition can lead to just chaos and confusion for employers. Like, how did you balance that?
Yes, we actually had an RFP process, which we haven't publicly announced the winners from that. But we defined what it is that we want them to do. Again, working with the previous pilot participants, regional intermediaries, and then the new town associations before we defined what that was. And we intentionally wanted to ensure we had every district covered in the state so that we wouldn't leave out a part of the state. So as part of the vetting process, we've looked at geographic scope, and that was a required component of what was submitted in the application. So we will be announcing that soon, but we will have statewide coverage for those connectors. And yes, not everyone was selected who applied, but it was an RFP process.
An RFP through Fairbanks or through a government institution?
Through the Summits iLab Indiana Governing Committee, we've had this non-formal coalition of the willing that's been meeting for 2 years that's making decisions.
Wonderful. Thanks.
Sure.
Other questions? Annalise, you put something in the chat about Ivy Tech. Did you want to talk about that?
Sure. I was just pointing out that because it's statewide, it's a bit easier to do statewide reform in partnership with a community college system that's statewide, and just wanted to point out that it's a bit distinct from how California operates. And the other thing that I wanted to say is I've been starting to interview employers in Indiana, and they do appreciate that they don't have to keep working in different districts to get things through. Like, it's much more streamlined for them to work with a community college system that's statewide. So kind of wanted to kind of throw that out there as a specific factor, an asset in Indiana.
Thank you. Anything else? We have a couple of minutes. Don't see anything. Claire, this has been fantastic. And the thing that strikes me, and there's a lot of amazing things you talked about, but I have to say that you and your foundation have amazing convening power, which makes this possible. Could you talk about that from yourself as a leader and getting these folks to the table and keeping them on task?
Well, thank you for saying that. I think it helps that I used to work in state government, and my job was to try to better align education agencies, which I'm sure you can guess was not accomplished and challenging work. But I had relationships with folks at the state, so I think that helped a little bit. And then in my role at the foundation, I sit on the statewide business roundtable board, and then also I sit on the Indianapolis Chamber board. So I have relationships with the business community too, so that probably helps. And also we're a funder, so we fund a lot of organizations. But I will say we've provided the funding, but we've truly had incredible commitment and buy-in from so many people. My co-chair on this initiative is actually the CEO of a bank, and he went to Switzerland in 2023 only because his wife said, "Let's go so we can go shopping." And he totally changed his mind and was like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing." And he has become my co-chair. He's come with me to Switzerland most of the trips we've done. He has a full-time job, and he's made this a commitment. And so he's just one example. We've had lots of other folks do that too. So I feel like we've been really lucky, and we're also moving as fast as we possibly can, which is frankly, I think, it's probably a little too fast of a speed, but that's because there's turnover in government leaders, there's turnover in business leaders. Like we feel like we got to move as fast as we can while we still have people that have actually been to Switzerland around. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Anita, do you want to close this out, please?
Sure. Thank you, Claire, and everyone for being here. This is fantastic. I will be sharing out this recording and related links and slides probably Friday, perhaps Monday, but most likely Friday. And I put a couple links in the chat for you all to keep in touch with us. There's a little Typeform link for any suggestions you may have relating to future topics or any thoughts you want to share about tonight's, or if you want to be added to our email list, and a link to our meetup page as well, which will also keep you in the loop on future gatherings. Our last gathering of the year will be in person sometime in the early part of December. So keep an eye out for that announcement. It will be somewhere in San Francisco, early December. But yeah, that's all I got. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your continued interest in ApprenticeSIP and apprenticeships, and look forward to seeing you at future meetings. And again, Claire, wonderful. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone. Take care.